So we have a great video of why getting fitted for golf clubs and having clubs that are too short for us. Um, we can definitely make contact with it, but it's going to be difficult for us to be consistent, and it's going to be difficult for our body to get into position. It's going to be consistent. And so what I mean by that is setting up to this golf ball. Um, we're not having a bad position overall. Our hands and club are, pretty much on plane. But the spacing in between, we just don't have a lot of room for us to rotate through. And what we're going to see here is that because our hands are a little bit too close to our body, we're going to end up having to rotate this club, far underneath and have something that ends up crossing the plane versus something that, kind of rotates and then comes up and then comes back down and through. And so what we're going to see here, if we just draw that one plane line, I think this is probably a pretty decent one for us to see. Again, we're going to have quite a bit of motion blur, but the first thing we're going to see is actually a really great takeaway. We've got a nice one-piece takeaway. The right hand's still on top. We're getting a lot of leverage. But the first part that breaks down is this right elbow. And so instead of having a position here where we start to get the club to work up, and there's a lot of reasons why this happens. This might just be a technique thing, but it's mostly because those hands are too close to our body that we don't have the space. And so what ends up happening is if we draw like a pretty long plane line here through the hips, we're going to see how this hand and the club and everything kind of works underneath along this plane line. And when we get to this position now, we're starting to see how our club is getting above the ball. And we're going to, unfortunately, from that position, start to get a little bit too far up and across the line. If the player at this spot decided, hey, this is the end of my backswing, we actually could probably make some good, moves with this. But what ends up going on is we don't have much of a stop. Because this right leg is all the way straight, we don't have a natural kind of end of that bowstring mechanism for our body to get resistance on. And because we're young and we're fit and flexible, we're going to end up continuing to rotate. And that rotation starts to get the club we call across the line. And so if we draw a line, kind of from the ball going this way to the feet, what we want to see is that club at the top, being something, in those positions there. But we can see how that club is now across both those lines. And so this ends up bringing that back elbow up as well. And it just really puts us in a precarious position to initiate that downswing. And unless we do the one thing, which is what this golfer does, unless we have that lower body start to squat and start to regain some of that spine angle, we're pretty much doomed. And so the golfer does a great job. We get to this position, we can see how we get that nice squat, and we start to really shallow that club out. And so if we draw some lines with the motion blur, we're not going to get like the most accurate positions here. But if we start back at this top, we can see how from the one before, we're now going to be whipping that club around and underneath. And so a lot of this with the upper body, we're having a pretty good technique of getting us back underneath and kind of trying to shallow and get, hitting the golf ball from the inside. The problem is that we're just so steep. And so we want to look at here is the body as we get into impact. We have some good lines here with the lead arm being relatively straight into impact. We're doing a great job transitioning the force into the ball. Our elbows underneath. But I think the big thing that we've lost because of that height is just that spine angle. We have a literal shelf in that back. And so what this does is the hips have to stop moving. And so the hips end up kind of continue to rotate and push out that direction. But the upper body is going to have this really forceful kind of turn. And so we end up seeing this really big turn. And so what this does for our body, not only does it create some inconsistency, but it's going to create a lot of pain in this part of our back because we're now kind of wringing our body out like a towel. And one of the telltale signs here, albeit this player kind of stripes its ball as you see go forward, is we're going to have a finish where that upper body just kind of continues to spin. And so we have here is this really big finish where this left elbow is going to come all the way back behind us because we've had this, a lot of upper body rotation, and we haven't had our hips do a lot of the work with rotating. So even with a lot of those mechanical, positions or faults to some degree, we can see that we could still stripe the ball. So it's not saying we're not going to hit it, but if there's a few things we could work on to really help right off the bat, The first one would be getting fitted, would be having clubs that are the correct length, so we can get the setup position where we're not having to have the hands so far underneath us, and we can have a little bit more room. And then the second one, getting to a position here and feeling like from here we're just going straight up. We're trying to open the door, come up the elevator, sort of thing. There's a lot of different terminologies for it, but allowing our body to get into a position where we can rotate and have the club kind of stay in front of us and not get so far stuck behind, so we don't have to have this crazy over the top move.